Welcome to another episode of Untethering Shame, where we explore the depths of shame resilience, healing, and the power of self-discovery. Today, we're tackling a topic that's central to so many relationships: shame and healing inside of marriage. Joining us is David Lee, founder and CEO of Daring Deeply Coaching. David is a trauma-informed coach who works with high-impact individuals and couples seeking to address deep-rooted wounds that often go unrecognized in personal relationships. Alongside his wife and teacher of the feminine, Paige Lee, David empowers clients to heal unprocessed shame and trauma by understanding the dynamics of masculine and feminine energies, developing radical autonomy, and embracing a new level of self-awareness. Today's conversation is crucial because shame, often rooted in childhood trauma, can erode trust, connection, and empathy within a partnership. David's approach offers couples a way forward through parts work, balancing curiosity with self-responsibility and shifting away from the need for external validation to find freedom within themselves. I'm honored to have David here today to shed light on how couples can begin healing, creating space for authenticity and a truly connected relationship. But I want to be clear, this conversation is not just relevant if you are in a serious partnership or married. This is information relevant to all of us, regardless of our relationship status. So I invite you to find a seat, get comfortable, and join us in this radical conversation to understand how our healing of childhood trauma and wounds can dramatically affect our ability to connect and deepen within relationships with others. David, I'm so excited that you're here. I've been looking forward to this conversation I don't even know when we met. It feels like months ago now, but I have been very much looking forward to this.
Yeah, when I saw you come up on my calendar today, or I guess last week, because I review my calendar on Sunday and kind of see what's going on,
Yeah.
I was reminded of how we already have done this podcast once
Yes, I
in our
know.
in our preliminary conversation, and we even
Yes.
said at the end, "Oh, we should have been hitting record the whole time." So we're going
Yes.
to do our very best to replicate that.
Yes. And allow all that magic to come back out again, which is the thing I've learned to trust, in that when you can really connect with somebody and the vibe is there, the vibe doesn't leave. It's just knowing you can make magic again. And so, yes, I'm going to similarly trust this as we dive in.
Absolutely, let's do it.
Okay. So I think the biggest thing that we started chatting about, and I think for listeners, like, sure, how'd you get into this? What's your story? Blah, blah, blah. Like, they can find that about you. The most, I think, resistance that I could imagine somebody feeling, and I can feel it even in my own self, is essentially the work that you do and what you're saying is that the conflict and the pain that I feel in my marriage most likely has nothing to do with my spouse, but all sorts of other shit that's getting in the way that I haven't dealt with up to this point.
Precisely, exactly. So we're going to start off fiery.
Yeah.
We're going to start
I
off
think
fiery.
that's where we have to go, because it would be so much more convenient if you were like, no, the problem is probably your spouse, and let's fix them.
Yeah.
And let's fix your communication style. And if you two could just do these, 5 things and cuddle more and do this, it'd be fine. This is the shit no one wants to talk about. So yeah, let's go there.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, it's so much easier. In fact, that's the vast majority of narratives out there, is that your marriage problems are about your marriage, about your
Yeah.
spouse. That somehow the complexities inside of your marriage dynamic happened when you got married. Or actually, we had to go through the honeymoon period when everybody had
Right.
great sex and
Right.
everybody's getting along and everybody actually likes your in-laws. And then, 6 months, 18 months, 2 years, or the baby comes.
Mm-hmm.
And then his socks really do bother you when they're laying on the floor for too long. Well, they were always there, right? And actually, his socks were laying on your floor long before he entered your home. Now, what does that mean? It means, yeah, I can hear you growling, which is good. And maybe other people that are listening to this right now. I hope so, because conviction is what moves us forward. And so I didn't believe this either. I mean, I spent the vast majority of my adult life fighting my partner, fighting the marriage, trying to save, fix, mend, or heal, or work on the relationship. And that's simply a myth. You cannot say fix, mend, or work on a marriage. That's impossible. You can work on you, and your partner can choose to work on themselves. Now, where do these complexities come from? They come from our perspective, my wife and I. We believe that every single hardship, complexity, challenge, confusion, frustration, level of bitterness and resentment that you feel inside of your marriage was there and has been there since your childhood, because we all possess unprocessed, unhealed, and often unknown childhood trauma wounding, still resonating inside of our nervous system. And what we're feeling inside of our marriage 10, 20, 30, 40 years later is actually an echo of the unprocessed wound still left over from childhood.
And so ultimately, because you're describing this, unprocessed, unhealed, which makes sense, but often again, unknown, do we then seek partnerships or seek relationships in which we sort of recapitulate pain or stay stuck in our pain? Or is it just that no matter who you pick and in a relationship with, this is going to come out because you can't suppress it forever?
Precisely. Yes, it's both and. So most notably, we will choose a partner when we're in an unhealed state, which the vast majority of us are when we enter into a marriage relationship, because this is unknown for the vast majority of people. So we believe that 8 billion of us, all 8 billion of us on this planet, possess unprocessed childhood trauma wounding. All of us. So we're all in the same boat, right? And actually, trauma wounding can be defined as when the nervous system is overwhelmed. It's as simple as that. So when I fell off my bike when I was 5 years old and I skinned my knee pretty severely, my caretaker in that moment said, "You're okay. You're okay. Get up. Stop crying. Boys don't cry. Rub some dirt in it. You'll be okay."
Right.
What happened in that moment was my physical and emotional pain was dismissed. It was diminished. It was ignored. Now it sounds like, well, that's just what kids do. That's just what parents do. No, that is a definition of trauma. So it wasn't the event that entered into my nervous system as trauma. It's not the event. It's the aftermath of that energy not being able to be released and processed with the help of a loving caregiver or adult. And why does trauma happen in childhood? Because we're most susceptible. We're most vulnerable under the control, under the demanding understandings of our caregivers. And why does their presence in our lives then bring trauma into our lives? Is because they're wounded too. They're wounded from their childhood if they haven't done the healing process. So to answer your question, it is yes. And the vast majority of us come together as adults. We identify a partner most notably through a trauma bond. Our trauma bonds, our wounds inside of us are connecting to our partner's wounds. It feels familiar. That's the veil of trauma, is that it feels familiar. Therefore, we stay in it. And then we say we are stuck in this energy. Well, we're not stuck. We're simply listening to the wounded parts of us that are telling us to make decisions that they believe will keep us safe from an experience in childhood that no longer exists. And so we trauma bond with our partner, and we continue to trauma bond. And I want to make a note here. This may lead us into another conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, your partner cannot trigger you. That's a myth. No one makes you feel anything. Your partner doesn't trigger you. You are triggered. You feel that emotional destabilization, that dysregulation. You feel that. You feel the anger, frustration, bitterness, resentment, confusion. You want to scream and yell. You want to leave. You want to be dismissive. You want to tell them off. You want to scream at the top of your lungs so your voice will be heard. But the reality is, the wounds within you, when your voice wasn't heard in the moment, in the conflict with your spouse, was because your voice wasn't heard long ago in childhood.
I think what you just said, that's a really key piece, which is why you're probably aware it could jump us into another conversation. I mean, is this idea of, well, they triggered me, or on the opposite side, I triggered them.
Yeah.
And there's this sort of displacement of blame, when in reality, there's no blame to be had. It's I was triggered, or they were triggered.
For sure.
And then looking at that. And I think part of you tell me, but I would assume that part of the reason why there's then resistance to seeing, well, this has nothing to do with my partner, is then the dominoes that fall after that moment. Then I say something shitty, they say something shitty. So obviously the problem is we need to not name call. We need to know how to take breaks. And then the focus is on really the aftermath, the dominoes that fell, which are really just kind of symptoms to tell you there's something going on, rather than going to what happened in that moment. We'll use me and my husband as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the dynamic that we have is I create experiences to be needed so that people don't leave. And that is a big wound that I had from childhood. My mom left. And it wasn't just my mom, it was partners that she had in our life, other people that would leave. So I would create circumstances in our marriage to be needed by a person who didn't need me, and then creating these positions where then I would resent him for either not noticing it, not needing me, not choosing me, whatever that was. And that would cause this conflict in our relationship that had nothing to do with him, but everything to do with my insecurity of believing somebody couldn't just want me. They had to need me. And if he didn't play into my system, that caused a lot of pain. But I didn't deal with that because I would rather the problem be, well, no, he's just being a dick and he didn't acknowledge me and all the things that I'm doing, and thereby reinforced to me that, see, he needed me. Thereby everything was great.
Exactly. What you've just defined, Kyira, is the cycle. And that's why it continues to recycle and recycle and recycle, because we're not getting to a break. And the break is to understand that that wound came from long ago. So the fact that you need people to need you is a
Right.
deep-seated wound from childhood,
Right.
when you needed your mom to need you. She needed people to need her.
Right.
And so the abandonment wound literally says, well, if I can get them to need me, there's no way they'll ever leave, because that will solidify, that will cement our tongue-in-cheek, wink, wink, our codependent, people-pleasing attachment bond.
Right.
Because if I know that they need me, well, I have leverage. And quite frankly, that's what couples in wounded dynamic trauma bonds are always searching for, is leverage. They're looking for a competitive edge. Now it sounds like we're talking about a football field.
Right.
But this is what happens more often than not in these marriage dynamics. And when I say these marriage dynamics, it's in some capacity in every marriage dynamic that is left with these unprocessed wounds. Now, what's interesting is that your husband, believe it or not, was attracted to your need to need him because of his unprocessed wound, which I'm unfamiliar with. I don't know, but you're shaking your head here on the camera saying, yeah, that's true. That is how we define a trauma bond.
Right.
So his wounds felt familiar to you, and your wounds feel familiar to him. And that's why you bonded. It's not that you don't love each other, although I've been in some regards relationship coaching for decades, and I still haven't defined what love is. So I'm not even, that's another rabbit trail we could go down. But what does love mean, right? What does that actually mean? But the reality is, we connect more often than not over what we think we need.
Yeah.
Rather than what we want for ourselves.
Yes.
Really important.
Yes. And I think, I'm really comfortable talking about this now because I think because of a lot of my early childhood trauma and being introduced to the need for, or the potential benefit for, some sort of therapy or coaching at a younger age, it allowed us to be more open to that when we were 22 and starting a relationship. We've been together for 14 years. Neither one of us is going to say, well, now we're good and it's great. Like, there's always work to be done in any relationship. But I think what you just described was what we eventually came to, because we would be like, what the fuck? Like, this has been happening over and over again. Like, we love each other. Again, I'm in complete agreement with you. And I have a client who, he and I would have these conversations. Every conversation around this was, what does love actually mean? And then I had another client and they would bring this up to me and be like, can you even tell me what it is? And so I'm in agreement with you. I think let's just use it for the sake of not a better term, but I don't even fully know exactly what it is either. But we would get to this place of like, I don't want to be with someone else and I love you and I don't want this to happen. How the fuck do we keep getting here? And the realization for both of us was around, oh, this doesn't have anything to do with us. For me, it was a lot of healing around my relationship with my mom and then subsequent relationships that I had created, and getting to a place of vulnerability of being like, I don't need to be needed, but I also need to learn how to be okay if I'm not chosen, and to trust that I will be okay if I'm not chosen. And until I can get to that place, I can't enter this relationship fairly. I'm going to, like you said, always be looking for leverage because that's safe. That is security. Even if it's false sense of security, I'm going to get to that. And for him, a lot of it is getting to a place of not defining his worth and value based on his ability to protect or take care of me, or to do some of those things, and having to break that down to realize, oh, we both need to be okay not recapitulating those roles and then healing those wounds that we had that, we're still probably doing it in some way. It's just like you do 95% of it. The last 5% really sucks. I think there's probably another 5% we still need to figure out. But I can say, having done that, boy, has that made it easier to get to the realization of like, oh, I'm not actually upset with you right now. I'm upset with this feeling that I want a tantrum because I want you to validate it, because I'm going back to when I was 5 and it didn't feel validated. Oh.
Yeah, it's interesting to use the word, Kyira, tantrum, because that's exactly correct. When we're in conflict, often spouses will say, quit acting like a
Right,
child.
like a child. Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's because from our perspective in working in parts work, those inner wounds are connected to the inner child, into the wounded little boy or little girl that's still waiting for you as an adult to respond to him or her and say that it's going to be okay. That's really, I just boiled down the whole process and how we help folks, right?
Yeah.
Is first we have to identify that original wound. That's
Yes.
critical. And it takes time to do that. And you're exactly correct. No one ever heals. There's no such thing as a healed person. We're going to be on this journey for the rest of our days. When you think about, if you're just introducing yourself into trauma healing today and you're 30, 40, 50 years old, think about the fact that that wound and multiple wounds have been festering inside of your system for 40 or 50 years.
Right.
Well, they're not, exactly. So they are entrenched. They know their position. That trigger that you feel that comes up in conflict with your spouse has been there forever, long before your spouse, as we've indicated. And it's relentless. That part is relentless. That voice is relentless. And here's the beautiful part about parts work, and the irony and the frustration, really, confusion, is that part that's triggering you to throw a temper tantrum, its actual action is wanting to keep you safe. It's actually a positive intent. Because if you do throw a fit, historically, we call this a confirming experience, historically, the fit has kept you safe.
Yeah.
It has gotten you what you want, which is safety. And remember, the nervous system is incredibly powerful and only has one job. It's myopic, and it's to keep you alive.
Right.
So if it believes that you are threatened by his inability to need you,
right,
you will throw a fit until he responds.
Yeah. And then thereby reinforcing and keeping us stuck in the pattern.
Exactly.
And the really fucked up part is that then you realize, I mean, I hated this. I rejected this so much, was the notion of the only way to heal is to no longer have him respond that way. For me, in my part, he needed to stop reinforcing this. I needed to stop seeking that reinforcement and then deal with the distress that came up from that, to recognize that that response pattern was never providing me with a true sense of security, but was reinforcing those beliefs and those patterns. And I would seek it. It was like an obsession and a compulsion, constantly coming back into play. And so, yeah, I definitely have had to. I honestly didn't. This was so interesting to me. I was never introduced to parts work the entirety of my master's program. I never was talked about. We never talked about internal family systems. That didn't come up until I worked in a trauma counseling center years after getting my degree. I was struggling with a client, and my therapist was like, or my therapeutic supervisor was like, have you ever heard of IFS? And I was like, no, what is this? I also hate reading. So if you could just like boil it down for me and teach me in 5 minutes, that would be great. And she's like, okay, well, let me give you the overview, but then obviously you need to go do some work around this. And it was incredible to realize how these parts of the self are created as an attempt to keep us safe. And the compassion I could develop for my clients and for me around that was incredible. It didn't mean I wanted to do the work to heal myself. I still wanted to stay at a distance from that and to make it still that Jordan needed to do better. It was Jordan's problem because he didn't recognize this and all of the things, because that felt safer. That felt like a safer thing that was leverage, to go back to your word. If it was him, if he was the problem, and if I could make him feel like the problem, I had leverage. Thereby, I would have this false sense of security. And so as I did the parts work of realizing now, I can recognize when this happens. I can recognize, I can feel it. It starts to bubble up. I start to notice a sense of resentment that I'm starting to have towards him. And I go, oh, that's interesting. What's happening here? What's changed? Oh, he's been working a lot more and he isn't giving me that verbal affirmation. We haven't had conversations and I'm feeling insecure. And I'm starting to listen to this voice inside of me that says, see, he doesn't need you. He's not around. Okay, that makes sense. That feels like a risk to me. What is true about my relationship right now? None of this is true. But gosh, I'm going back to when I felt alone before and I felt like something is going to happen. What do I need to do for myself right now to reinforce that I am okay? What is that part asking for?
Yeah. What you did is you went and had a communication. You're building a relationship with the part. That's essentially what parts work is you're building a relationship with
Yeah.
that wounded part of you that is screaming for attention. And the screaming for attention is affecting your body, your mind, your spirit in many, many ways. Okay. It's metaphysically affecting you, your temper, sweaty palms, elevated heart rate. I should go on.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
But as Bessel says, the body does keep the score, right? Your
Yeah.
body will respond. Trauma is entrapped in the body. It's in our cells and our
Yes.
tissues and our bones. And so when we have those triggers come forward, when you had that trigger came forward that says, uh-oh, he doesn't love me anymore. Uh-oh, he doesn't need me anymore. What you did in that moment was wait, pause. First, I want to acknowledge and validate the part that's coming forward says, see, told you so. He doesn't love you.
Yeah.
See, you're not worthy. I told you. Now, it seems nefarious. It seems like that part is being mean and cruel, but actually that part is, again, attempting to keep you safe from further hurt. Because if you disregard his lack of attention, or so your parts think, then you could be hurt worse.
Right.
So all of our parts only have one job, and that's to keep us safe. But it feels incredibly ironic. It feels like they're trying to hurt us.
Right.
But in reality, they're simply trying to get our attention. They're little boys and little girls of our past, of our childhood, of when those original wounds came into our nervous system as trauma. They're coming forward and saying, pay attention to me. I need help. So the greatest evolution of a healthy, polarized marriage relationship, Kyira, is when we can, in the moment, in the middle of dysregulation and conflict, is we can literally see our partner's parts and have compassion upon them. That's their nirvanic state, if we want to put some language on
Right.
it. That is ultimately, I want to be able to see Paige's wounded little girl before I start attacking Paige's little girl. Because that's exactly the confirming experiences that she's had that says, see, this is what he's going to do. He's going to fly off the handle. He's going to become defensive. He's going to attack me. He's going to call me names. He's going to raise his voice. He's going to put me in his place. See, told you.
Right.
But what happens is when I can pause, like you were doing in your parts work there, if I can pause and simply see her words, her actions, her rolling of the eyes, whatever the case may be, and simply hold space for all of her emotions, all of her parts, all of the wounded little girls that are coming forward and saying, see, he's just like every other man that I've ever dealt with. See, told you. Rather, if I can step forward by stepping back and simply being her refuge, her sanctuary, provide a level of sanctity for her to express and allow her parts to come forward while I remain regulated and see the wounded little girl and say, it's okay. I get it. I can understand. Tell me more. Help me understand.
Mm-hmm.
What do you need right now? I've got you. That's what I want. That's what I want, to be able to consistently, on the daily, to provide Paige.
Okay. You already alluded to this, so you know where I'm going with one of my questions. The two things that are coming up for me, just kind of thinking about listeners. One, even in the example I gave, it was really only about me. We didn't even include Jordan's parts that might be coming up and what might be happening there. And so that sounds easy if you don't also have your parts coming up that are coming into play.
Right.
And so one, how do you navigate that? And I'm assuming that's a big part of why you work with couples individually, because we have to be able to help each of them do that step back, the healing of their own wounds, and then the ability to then translate that into how they show up for other people. The second part, and I'm assuming these come in together, but feel free to respond however you want. The second part of it is then, what do you do with the aftermath piece? When in those moments they haven't yet been able to do that, and then you both start responding in a way that is hurtful and harmful to the other person. How do you bring that part of the conversation and those dominoes into the healing as well? Or do we even need to have those conversations if what we're really doing is talking about those individual inner child parts coming up?
Yeah. Yeah. Rupture and repair, right? Rupture and repair. How do we do that? But when we're first engaged in this process, and you're absolutely correct, that's why we work with couples, but we work independently, because every single individual, every single spouse is worthy of having their unique story to be honored and told and healed, which gets us to radical personal responsibility, extreme ownership. Your wounds
Right.
are your wounds, and that's the only ones that you're going to ever be able to heal. In the moment when her parts are firing and my parts are firing, we have what we refer to as a parts war, right? It's not us. It's not David and Paige having conflict, because from our teaching, from our work, the self doesn't carry the self, capital S. It is our compassionate and our courageous and our clear and our calm, intelligent us. So the self cannot be traumatized. That is, the self has always been there. But then we have these parts who are incredibly loud. But when our parts show up, which is when conflict happens, I have to be fully aware that if I allow her parts to affect my parts, we're not going to get anywhere. So can I practice my own parts regulation without ever being in conflict? Yes. Without ever being in partnership, by the way. So for all the single people out there that may be listening, you don't need a partner to help regulate your nervous system.
Right.
Because this is an individual journey. Now, what I will say is, within the context of a marriage relationship, you will heal at a more efficient rate. Why? Because you are in the container. You are trial and error every single day. You are in the testing ground every single day. Because if not, then it's just theory, right? Now, that doesn't mean to all the single people, go out and get married so then you can heal. That's not what I said. Don't put words in my mouth, ladies and gentlemen. So my responsibility is to be aware of what parts are most prevalent. So, for example, you have shared very vulnerably that a significant one is an abandonment wound. Mom left. And it is terrorizing to think that somebody doesn't answer a text in a reasonable amount of time, for example, because a part could come forward and say, see, they don't love me anymore, which sounds ridiculous when we say it out loud, but that's exactly what's going on. Because what it's doing is it's reinforcing a confirming experience that says, see, when people don't respond in a timely manner, it means mom's gone. Wait, did I just say mom is gone? Wow. Now I've tapped back into that original wound, but that's exactly what's going on.
I'll give an example really quick as you're saying this,
Please.
because it happened last night. where Jordan was going to pick her up from school, take her to swim lessons. And I am working really hard on not overworking, not making my value about what I do. Because again, there's a lot more to my wounds around that too.
Sure.
My worth was only as good as what I could produce and what other people thought about me. And so I'm working on being like, gosh, you know what I actually value and the me that I want when I'm not responding to those wounds, when I'm not responding to those core beliefs, I want to be able to be spontaneous and to go to our neighbor's house for dinner or to, whatever. I was like, you know what? I don't have to do anything. I could come with you to swim lessons. So we could go watch her swim lessons together. He said something to the effect of, sure, or if you want to. That was not enough for me. I did not feel chosen and I didn't feel like he wanted me. So my part came in and went, he doesn't really want you there. He doesn't actually want you to be around. He doesn't really care about you. And now I was able to stop it. And I said something to him in the moment and said, I can feel myself resisting you because I have told myself that your response means this. I'm not asking you to say anything because this isn't about you. This is about me. I'm just saying it out loud to talk through to myself. I am okay. I don't need you to respond a certain way for me to be wanted and needed.
Yeah.
But it came up just like that. And the reason I bring it up is when you're like, oh, it sounds like a silly example. No, it does. But also it just fucking happened to me last night, even with this work where I'm like, he doesn't want me because he said something to the effect of like, sure, probably trying to help me feel like I didn't have to go. I didn't have to feel responsible that he had it. He was okay. But how quickly, if I didn't notice that, would I have spent the rest of the night resenting him that he didn't really want me there?
Exactly. Yeah. So congratulations. By the way, that was beautiful. Yeah. Let me provide some clarification there. I'm gonna provide you some loving correction. I want you the next time that happens, I want you to consider saying this instead.
Okay,
I
I'm
have
ready.
a part of me that is believing this. There's a part of me that thinks that you don't want me. There's a part of me that's incredibly angry at you right now. Because
Ooh, I
when
like
we
that.
say
Okay.
myself, here's what I'm telling myself. No, it's not true, actually. Yourself is, wow, I'm able to actually stand up and say that there's a part of me that says this. That's the self.
Right.
Because in parts work, the whole issue is that our parts are blended with the self. There is not a separation. And so that's why we get angry at the other person. And what we are creating a new narrative within the people that we work with and say to the whole world and to your audience members is that it's not your husband that's a problem.
Yeah.
It's your husband's parts that are wounded. And so if we can begin to develop that language, there's a tactic. If we can begin to develop that language within ourselves first to say in that particular scenario, there's a part of me that feels abandoned because you just said, sure, if you want to. What that does in communication with Jordan, it takes the heat off of you and him.
So true.
Because what you're doing is you're separating, you're unblending.
Yes.
You are saying there's a part. Yes, it's a part of you, but it's not the self.
Right.
It is a part that's saying, wait a minute, you don't want me to come with you? Right? And so
like
then
that.
you two can then together honor the little girl who came forward and said, you don't want me. See how now it's a collective community of husband and wife working together on your part that has nothing to do with him in the first place.
And I think in turn, that slight language shift could help because sometimes I think when I come through and I say it as like, I think it does, he experiences that as a trigger and then his thing comes in to try to protect me and fix it. And then either that leads to him feeling like he has to defend, which he's done the work to kind of figure out when he needed to do that and how that showed up, or the need to sacrifice any aspect of him to take care of me, which again goes back to his pieces. And so I think that subtle language shift, like you said, invites the two of us in a collective state now to come in instead of opening the door and saying, hey, do you want to invite any of your old selves in, your parts? And
Right.
let's bring them all in for a party and let's not really acknowledge them. And so I think it's true. I do know, I'm assuming, so you have people that come in and this is so new to them. They're like, what are you talking about? The problem is just this, this, and this. And so,
Right.
again, you're initially working on that piece. I could see where, like at the stage we're at now, sometimes it starts to feel like, gosh, this feels like a lot of work. This feels so like, this feels silly. Should this even have to be a thing? I should just be fine now because I can see it and it's not a big deal.
Right.
What do we do with that part? And then we can walk it back for the people that are like, wait, you're still 10 steps ahead. I'm just starting to realize that maybe it's not about my spouse, but something else. But what do you
Right.
do
Right.
on this side of like, see, you should just be fine now. You've done enough of this. Like, you've done 95%. Get the fuck over it.
Right.
Stop feeling like we need to make this a thing. How do we deal with
Mhm.
that side?
Yeah. So the very notion, if we are dismissing action and healing moving forward, that is the
Right.
very definition of a trauma response. Because we're trying to hurry along the process. Well, now we're into
Mm,
overperformance. Now we're into, I need this to be done. Why? Well, because then I can move on to something else. Oh, well, there's the trauma response.
right.
Because once upon a time, you were told as a little girl that if you get things done, someone will love you.
Right. Thank you for
So,
that connection.
yeah, you're
Uh-huh.
welcome.
I
You're
see
welcome.
that. Yep.
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
send an invoice.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So when
Ah,
people say, and believe me, Gary, this was me for my whole life up until several years ago.
mm-hmm.
No, I'm good. I'm over that. Time heals all wounds. I dealt with that. I went to
Right.
about 10 therapy sessions 10 years ago. I'm good. I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
When folks say that, I get it. I understand. I've been there. But that in and of itself is evidence of still unprocessed
Yes.
childhood wounding, saying, I'm done. I don't want to visit anymore. Well, what
Yes.
we bring to the table when working with our clients is, one, you're never done. And two, we're not going to go be in it. We're going to go be with her, meaning the part. We're
Mm,
going to develop a new relationship with that, or a relationship if we've never even engaged in
yeah.
parts work. So when that part came forward, your process last night, again, using an example,
Yeah.
your process is to befriend her.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first step. Well, that's not even the
Mm-hmm.
first step. The first step is to acknowledge, I
Right.
see you. I hear you.
Yep.
Right? How does it feel for the audience listeners? I want you to just take a moment, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and I want you to consider what it feels like when someone simply acknowledges you,
Mm,
when they validate you, when they say, I see you, I hear you, your opinion matters. I may not agree with you, but your opinion is strong and I'm ready to listen for more.
mm,
Imagine, by the way, if that narrative was true last week
mm-hmm. Which I'll
in
just
the
say
United
for the time
States.
that we're recording this is a week from the election.
Right.
Yes. How true.
Yeah.
Yes.
Imagine if people on two political sides or any two sides
Yes.
were curious before critical, that actually looked at their parts as wounded children, which, by the way,
Mm,
as far as I know, when anybody sees a wounded child, our heart breaks.
right.
So imagine the compassion that can come out of that narrative
Yes.
if we simply see the parts of our spouse are inflamed and it has nothing to do with us. So
Mm,
you were asking, Kira, about the aftermath. You were asking
yeah.
about, okay, so what happened? So rupture and repair. Repair is important. It's critical. And what I mean by that is we have to have resolution when we have a parts war, when we
Right.
have conflict within a marriage relationship, which happens frequently.
Right.
Far too often, we sweep it under the rug. Person leaves, hangs up the phone, goes, gets in the car, starts to make dinner, starts playing with the kids, and it's really never brought back up, which is a trauma response, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's probably how conflict was handled in your home growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And then if no one ever brings it back up, then it's fine. It's fine. But the reality is it's not fine because there's been ruptures, there's been hurt, There's been a lack of seeing each other's values, which are being protected by those wounded parts that came forward as a trigger. So what's important to note is when we are in the repair process and there's been some latency, there's been some time, there's been some breathing room, it's the next day, it's super important for each spouse. And then, of course, the question's coming through right now saying, well, who has to do it first? Who has to apologize first? Who has to, The answer to that question is yes,
Right.
both of you.
Right.
It's really important when we're in the repair process because we didn't do it at the forefront of the conflict by saying, this is a part coming forward. I'm realizing this. I have a part of me that's super pissed right now at you. We have to go back after the conflict and say, you know what? I allowed my parts to come forward. I allowed my parts to run the show. I allowed my wounded little boy or wounded little girl to come forward and insult you. And for that, I'm sorry. Additionally, know that I am taking a concerted effort to work on healing that part. Now, this is all real elevated language. I understand lots of people are listening to this right now like, what? I could never imagine saying that. That's okay. That's okay. That's my language. It doesn't necessarily mean that's what I say to Paige all the time.
Right.
What I say is that my parts came forward. We do say that. We're at that point. My parts came forward. It wasn't me. The parts came forward. They attacked you. I allowed them to run the show, which I've often said. I never want my parts to be in charge of my credit cards, my driving, how I parent my children, how I make love to my wife. Meaning they have a different strategy. They have a different motivation, right? So I come to the table and I say, babe, I allowed my parts to run the show. I allowed my parts to run this argument. And for that, I am sorry. And know that I'm aware of it and that I'm working really, really hard on that particular part or these particular parts. Which, by the way, and you were indicating this too, is both Paige and I, we both have therapists, incredible therapists. We have coaches who help us in various parts of our journey. Why? Because we can't do this work. You can't pour from an empty cup.
Right.
So we are constantly, Paige and I are doing this for a living. We're helping men, women, and couples all over the planet do this. And we're drinking our own Kool-Aid. Really super important. And I know you can attest to that too, Kyira. So we're constantly in this process ourselves. We're doing this work. David and Paige are doing this work every day inside our home. And in many ways, we're test driving it. Well, that's interesting. I think that just became content. Right? Because we are in the mud. We are in the trenches. We are test driving this. Why? Because I want the relationship where I can honestly and passionately and fervently love my wife for her. And this is important, and I can love her parts too. Because they're a part of her.
Right.
In fact, we jokingly say this often. A part will come forward just in conversation. Somebody will get sassy or somebody will say, well, I don't like them, or gossip, or whatever the thing is.
Right.
And we have this running joke where we look at each other and say, oh, there's that part.
Yep.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And she's welcome here too. And he's welcome here too. And I love him here. I love him. I love her too. What that does, by the way, that's an external communication to her part that energetically is heard and seen. I mean, believe me, if everybody on the planet was doing parts work, we wouldn't have to have elections. We wouldn't have to have peace talks. We wouldn't have to have marriage counseling. We wouldn't be on this call. So the reality is, wow, if we could fully identify and validate and acknowledge the wounded parts of us that have been resonating inside of our nervous system for decades, and recognize that that is the reason why we have any type of complex conflict, frustration, confusion, bitterness, resentment, rage in our adult relationships, we're going to get a leg up. And that's exactly what we're doing.
I Love this. I also know that we are at time. I think the cool thing with conversations, and I found this with the podcast, my goal is never that an episode solves things because that just perpetuates the same ridiculous expectations that we've had. My goal is to, I think about kicking things up in our brain pond to be like, no, I'm good. Like you said, I'm fine. I'm fine. We're not, and that's okay.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean that you are broken, the problem, you need to go fix it right away. Again, I'm reconnecting with my overperforming self that still feels that way about myself in different ways too. And sort of this notion that I want it to feel incomplete when we're ending an episode, because I think that will help drive us to keep going and create some more curiosity. And so I'm curious if you can do two things for the listener. One, their brain pond is sufficiently kicked up. They're like, I want more. I don't know how to make sense of everything, but I know I'm there. What would be that next 1% step that you would invite them to do?
Hmm.
And then subsequently, part two, where do they go to find you if they're like, okay, now I'm ready and I want David and Paige to be on my team to help
Yeah.
build that support for me?
Yeah. The 1% step, I like how you said that, Kyira, is simple acknowledgement that your rage, your frustration, the reason why you're pissed off at your spouse, the reason why you're angry with your child, the reason why you cannot take your
Mhm.
boss one more day is simply when you feel that emotion, is simply acknowledge it and say to yourself, this is only a part of me.
Mm.
It's not me. This is a part of me that has been there for a long time. I have felt anger toward authority since I was a child, for example.
Mhm.
I have felt anger toward women since I was a child, for example. I have felt
Mhm.
confusion around men since I was a child, etc., etc. Is simply acknowledge the trigger, because that's what it is. When we feel enraged, when we feel shame, when we feel humiliation, when we feel like we're backed into a corner, when we feel overwhelmed and we want to lash out in rage, simply pause and say, oh, this is a part of me. This is not me.
Mhm.
That's the very first step to acknowledge, because so many people get up every single day and truly believe that they're effed up, that they're
Mhm.
broken, that they're a hot
Yes.
mess, and that they will never find relief.
Right.
So if they can begin to provide themselves the full understanding that there's a part of them that's wounded, they're not broken.
Mm. I
And
love
then
that.
secondly, where you can find us, go to our website. It's the best place to go. It's daring-deeply.com. Make sure you have the dash in between Daring Deeply. I'm not sure where daringdeeply.com will take you, so I am not responsible. But daring-deeply.com, that will take you through our entire process. We'll let you know more about David and Paige, and it will have your first step into the healing process if you're interested in working with us. Our first step is what we call the Daring Deeply assessment. It's a questionnaire. It's a 70-question questionnaire. It's a quiz if you like to take quizzes. And what that tool does is helps provide you an understanding and help you begin to identify where those wounds came from. And then
Mhm.
the fantastic part of that assessment is that you have the opportunity to get on a Zoom call with me, and we'll review those results. And then I will provide some recommendations on what your next steps are in your healing journey. But it's an incredible way for you to get to know you. It's going to ask you questions about your past, your present, your future, your relationship with control and passivity and procrastination and over controlling and resentment and bitterness and mom and dad and siblings and all of that. It's a very powerful tool. We feel like it's a comprehensive tool to help you begin that healing journey forward.
I love that. And I think the next 1% is a great invitation for people before they do that too. That idea of just creating. I think what you did that's really helpful is create the universality around this. We know that in sort of group therapy, that's one of the benefits when you have a group community healing is this creation of, oh, I'm not the problem. I'm not broken. I am not beyond repair. There is pain, there are problems, there are like all of these elements that we can start to see it through a different lens. And so I think that initial phase is really allowing that creation of universality and curiosity rather than shame, ultimately, to just be like, this is it, period. And then we stay stuck in those negative feedback loops that just keep us in those states of wounding. And so I will make sure, listeners, that the link to their website, along with their YouTube channel, which has amazing content, and all of the other links are listed in the show notes. So make sure that you check that out. Even if you're like, I'm not ready yet, just bookmark it. Bookmark this episode, bookmark their website so that you have it available. And remember what David mentioned before. It is not just work that you can do when you are married and in a relationship. This is work you can start doing now. So even if you're like, gosh, I really resonate with David, but I'm not in a committed partnership, that doesn't mean that you can't look at their resources and reach out. These things are available to you when you are ready to do that next step and to start that healing process.
Yeah.
So we'll have all that there. Listeners, again, remember, we're going to take this one bite at a time. This has been decades of untreated, unprocessed, unacknowledged wounding. We're going to go slowly and remind ourselves that it's a process. We do not need to just solve it, fix it. We can be in it together. And I will see you back here next Sunday.